So I'm just going to summarize a few thoughts to help you digest some of the lessons that you've learned. And we've heard a lot about the Internet of Things, the IoT, and how can you take advantage of it? How can you make the most of it in your organizations? The possibilities are enormous. Well, I think for you, you need a different meaning for IoT. IoT means improve our thinking. Or even more than that, innovate our thinking. What we've got to do inside our organizations to take advantage of this technology is to innovate our thinking. And I'm going to give you some stories and examples of how to do that very briefly. But before I do that, let me ask you a question. If you were at a barbecue or a social event and somebody said, "What line of work are you in?" what would you say? Just give the answer to the person next to you. What would you say? "What line of work are you in?" What would you say? Say it to the person next to you. I'm a city planner. I'm a project manager. I'm an IT. What do you say? Say those things. Okay, because I think what you should say is, I'm in the creative sector. I'm in the creative industries. I want you to turn to the person next to you and say, "I work in the creative sector." Say that, please. Try it. I work in the creative sector, because that's what you should do. IT, all this marvelous information technology, is really a tool not just for running the business, but for transforming the business. It should really stand for innovation transformation. That's what IT is for you. And we can see examples of it, and it's desperately needed, particularly in the public sector. Hard to do in the public sector, but desperately needed. When DVLC changed, do you remember when you used to get your license for your car, and you have to go to the post office, and you had to take with you your insurance certificate and your MOT certificate, and you had to queue up behind a little old lady sending a parcel to Singapore, and eventually you'd get your license for the next 12 months. Remember that? And then they moved it all online. And online it checked the MOT database, it checked the insurance database online. It cut their administration costs by 75% in DVLC. By 75%. And it improved service for customers. They could sit at home and do it. So technology is a tool for transforming the business, not just improving it, not just running it a little bit better. And that's your job, to find ways to do that. Oh, by the way, when I said, "What line of business are you in?" it reminds me of the story of a woman who met a man in a nightclub, and he was a very attractive man, very good-looking and suave, sophisticated, and they arranged to go on a date. And then a few days later, she was in Aldi, and she saw him there, and he was stacking boxes of washing powder. And she went up to him very angrily. She said, "Look, when I asked you in the nightclub what line of work you were in, you said you were a jet fighter pilot." He said, "No, I didn't. I said I was part of the aerial display team." So that's, well, sorry about this. What line of work are you in? So let me tell you one or two stories. And let me start by a story about a man called Ted Hoff. Ted Hoff got a PhD in electronics in 1969. And he joined a little startup company called Intel. He was the 12th employee. And Intel they were a tiny jobbing electronics company. And they got a commission from a Japanese calculator manufacturer called BusyComp. And BusyComp said, "We want you to redesign the 12 circuits that go into our calculators." And they do: add, multiply, store, divide. They gave the job to Ted Hoff. They said, "Make the circuits faster and denser." He'd never worked on calculator circuits before. And he looked at the problem, and he went to his boss, he went to his manager, and he said, "What the customers asked for is 12 hardwired circuits, but I think it might be possible to do all 12 functions with one circuit if we could program it. Can I try that, please?" And his boss, to his eternal credit, said, "Yes, why don't you try it? If it doesn't work, I'll get one of the experienced engineers to cover for you." Ted Hoff invented the microprocessor. Every device you've got today, whether it's a car, a washing machine, or a mobile phone, is packed full of microprocessors. It's fueled the growth of Intel into a multi-billion-dollar corporation, all because one boss said to one employee, "Yes, why don't you try your crazy idea?" Now here's the question. What would you have said if you'd been Ted Hoff's boss? If he'd come to you and said, "What the customers asked for is this, I want to try something that's never been tried before, this." What would you have said? Because I think 9 out of 10 bosses, maybe 99 out of 100 would say no. That's what we believe in customer service here. If the customer wants that, well, let's do that, and we can move on to the next job, we can make a profit. But the innovative leader, the lateral thinker, is always curious. They're not just interested in getting the job done, they're interested in finding better ways to do the job. And if the question is there a better way to do what we're currently doing? The answer is always yes. You just ain't found it yet. There's always a better way. After I left university, I worked for IBM. I was in sales and marketing. And then in the early 1980s, IBM dominated mainframe computers. But they noticed that little companies like Atari and Commodore and Apple were coming up with personal computers. And they said to a man called Don Estridge, we want you to build an IBM personal computer. And at that time, IBM was totally vertically integrated. It built everything itself. It built its own motherboards, its own power supplies, its own operating systems, everything. And Don Estridge realized that if he followed the IBM way of doing things, the product would be over-engineered, too expensive, and too late to market. So he broke every rule in the IBM rulebook. He designed an open architecture system. Anyone could look inside it and see how it was designed. He went outside the company to Intel and bought the microprocessor, thereby making Intel's fortune. He went outside to Microsoft to buy the operating system, thereby making Microsoft's fortune. He brought the product to market in less than a year. And it was a remarkable success, not because it was the best, but because it was a platform for other people to use and develop, and actually became a standard. He died in a plane crash in 1985, but by the time he died, Don Estridge, he'd built the PC business into what would have been the third largest computer company in the world if it had been a standalone company, after IBM and DEC. And that's what innovative people do. They break the rules. And going back to Ted Hoff, my advice to you is hire really bright people and then empower them to try things. Set them free. Your job, you don't have to come up with all the best ideas to be an innovative leader. You have to employ really bright people and then give them a clear direction and let them come up with ideas and try those. You've got to give them the freedom to experiment, and that means you've got to give them the freedom to fail. Freedom to succeed means freedom to fail. You can't get one without the other. Who here has been to the USA? Who's driven a car in the USA? Who's turned right at a red stoplight in the USA? How did it feel when you first did it? It's amazing, isn't it? So I went and I came to the car behind me beeped, and then I remembered I'm allowed to turn right on a red stoplight if the road's clear. And after that, I thought, what a fantastic rule. I'm empowered. Somebody's trusted me to make a decision on my own. In this country, if you come to a set of traffic lights in the summer's morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, the road's completely empty, you're not allowed to drive through. You'd get a ticket if the policeman saw you, but it's perfectly safe to do so. And in the States, you're allowed to do that. And guess what? In your business, there's lots of red stoplights, which you should allow people to drive through if they think it's safe to do so. A place like Connexin is a small company, less than 100 employees. They can do this. Big public sector companies, very, very difficult. Loads of rules, loads of regulations that somebody put there once at a time. They thought it was a good thing if we restrict this. You can't do this without all of these approvals. And it just slows down innovation. It kills it. Your job is to let your best people drive through red lights. If they think if they believe in the organization, if they're doing it for the benefit of the company. Hewlett-Packard, for a long time, had a thing called the Medal of Defiance. And the Medal of Defiance was awarded to somebody who'd broken the rules inside Hewlett-Packard in order to help a customer, in order to get something done, in order to bring something to market, to solve a problem. And what they were saying is, we're a big company, but we can still act like a small company. We want you to be an entrepreneur. We want you to feel like you're part of owning this company. After I left IBM, I worked for Ashton Tate. I was marketing director, then managing director. They were a database company in the 1980s. And one of the rules in our business at that time was, and it was the same in all the software companies, your source code was your crown jewels. You wouldn't let anyone else see the actual lines of code that made up DBase 2 or Framework or Multimate or any of our products. And the same with Lotus 123 or Oracle or any of those. And that was the unwritten rule. And a man called Linus Torvalds came along and said, what if the opposite were true? What if we did not just something different? What if we made the source code completely open to anyone to tamper with? He created Linux. And by doing that, he lost control. But he unleashed a torrent of creativity. People around the world were tinkering with it and improving it. And a very powerful question for you to ask is, what if the opposite were true? Not just what if we did something. What if's a good question to ask, by the way. I would urge you to ask what if in your meetings. But what if the opposite were true? And a lot of things that used to be true are no longer true. You know, I was told when I first, don't turn off the engine of the car when you come to the traffic lights because you'll wear out the starter motor. You remember that? And now it just goes off automatically. The opposite's true. You can't drive on the hard shoulder. Do you remember that? And somebody in the Road Highways Agency was brave enough to say, what if the opposite were true? What if we let people drive on the hard shoulder under certain circumstances? And they did that. They experimented on the M40 and then eventually went smart motorways. And so your job is to ask those very basic, the day you joined your organization, you ask a whole bunch of dumb questions. Why do we do this? What's the purpose of it? What's the added value here? Why do we need this report? We've always done that report. You have to get that report out by Tuesday. But you've got to go back and start challenging those things. Ask the very basic, why are we doing this? What's the added value here? What does the customer really, is there a better way of doing what the customer wants? Do they have to go to the post office to get their license renewed? No, there's a better way. So that's Linus Torvalds. I've got time for maybe one or two more stories. Let me tell you one of my favorite stories. Up until 1952, there was only one television channel, one TV station in the UK. It was the BBC. And then in 1953, the government auctioned licenses for commercial TV stations by region. And a lot of companies thought this is a fantastic opportunity. We can sell advertising on TV for the first time. A license to print money. So they've got teams of analysts on to look at which areas had the best demographics, the wealthiest people who would generate the most advertising revenue. There was a little company in the south of England called Granada Cinemas, run by a Jewish businessman, Sidney Bernstein, whose parents had fled persecution in Eastern Europe to come to this country. They were immigrants. And he said to his marketing assistant, he said, I'd like to bid for one of these regions, he said. He said, but I don't want you to find the richest region in the UK. I want you to find me the wettest region in the UK. And they went away, the assistant went away, came back, he said, the area with the most precipitation per head of population is the northwest of England. So they bid for that. And he got it fairly cheap. They got Manchester, Liverpool, Bolton, Bury, all those places. And he set up Granada TV in Manchester. And by the way, of all the companies that won a franchise in 1953, only one survived to this day. It's Granada. Why did he do it? Well, he'd realised there's no point in getting Bournemouth or Chelsea and Westminster. If everyone's out walking the dog in the park or they've gone to the restaurant, you want somewhere where it's pouring down outside, people stay in to watch TV. But the point of the story for you is this. When everyone else is looking for the richest, the innovative leader, the lateral thinker, looks for the wettest. They deliberately look in a different direction. And if you're focused totally as a city planner on improving the road traffic flow or reducing air pollution, and you're missing things to the side all the time. De Bono said this. He said, you can't look in a new direction by staring harder in the same direction. If I'm looking straight at you, I can't see what's happening over here. No matter how hard I stare at you, I've got to turn to see what's happening over here. David Bowie, in his great song Changes, said, turn and face the strange. That's what I'm urging you to do. Turn and face in a different direction. One final story. Giorgio Don. Giorgio Don is an Argentinian car mechanic. And a friend came to see him one evening and he said, I'll give you a puzzle. I bet you can't solve this. If I stuff a cork into an empty wine bottle, can you get it out? And George said, no, I can't do that. I don't know how to do it. And his friend said, well, I know how to do it. And he said, you can see this video on YouTube shows you how to do it. If you go on YouTube, you can see it. And the way the trick works is you get a plastic bag and you put it through into the neck of the bottle. Then you jiggle the cork around until it's in the plastic bag. Then you inflate the plastic bag slightly and you can pull out the cork. You can see it. It works. And Giorgio Don went to bed that night. And he woke up in the middle of the night with a brainwave. He said, getting a baby that's stuck in the birth canal of a mother out is like getting a cork out of a bottle. It's the same problem, mechanically. And can I use that same principle to help extract a baby that's stuck? And he came up with what's called the O'Don device, which after a lot of persuasion, Becton Dickinson developed, and it's now in use all around the world. It's a very simple device, it's safe, it's cheap, and it's helped people in many, many countries. And the point of the story is this: he didn't think about the problem as a doctor or a nurse or a clinician. He thought of the problem like a car mechanic. He said, getting a baby that's stuck in the birth canal isn't a medical problem, it's a mechanical engineering problem. Let's use a mechanical engineering principle to solve it. And that's what I'm saying to you. If you're going to innovate our thinking, we've got to think like different people. Instead of thinking like a planner, think like a cyclist, think like a car mechanic, think like an old person who's struggling in a care home, or a very young person who's trying to get internet access. You've got to think in different terms, and that will help you. And he was an engineer, George O'Don, and I'm an engineer by training. Engineers are trained to think differently, and I'm reminded of the story of the city that had a problem, this public sector story, with the lights in the subways, and they kept being stolen. People come along, thieves would steal, antisocial behavior you call it, don't you, ASB or something, and they'd steal the lights. And they said to the engineer, you've got to solve this problem because it's costing us, it's dangerous, and we're exposed, but you can't change the position of the lights, and we haven't got much of a budget. So he did some lateral thinking. He came up with what I think is a brilliant idea. He changed all the light fittings from being a clockwise thread to an anti-clockwise thread. So if a thief went up and tried to unscrew the bulb, they were actually tightening it. And even if they'd unscrewed it, it would be no use to them because they'd only have clockwise threads at home anyway. So engineers have to think differently, and you have to think like an engineer, find an engineering solution. And I'll just finish with my story about the engineer who was playing golf with his friend, the priest, and the doctor. And the group in front of them were terribly slow. Held them up all the way around. Took them 5 hours, over 5.5 hours to get around. The group in front kept losing the balls, wouldn't let them play through. When they came off, they went to see the professional. They said, that group in front of us are a disgrace. They took forever to get around the course. They should be thrown off. And the professional said, well, that group in front of you are a group of blind firemen. 2 years ago, there was a fire at the clubhouse. They risked their lives to save people. We've said they can play here anytime they want free of charge in recognition of what they did. And the priest said, I feel awful about what we said about those courageous firefighters. I'm going to go and say mass for them. And the doctor said, I feel awful about what we said about those brave firemen. I'm going to go back and see if any of my colleagues in Harley Street can use any of the latest techniques of ophthalmic surgery to help them. And the engineer said, why don't they play at night? All right. So, to summarize, innovate our thinking. That's what we've got to do to take advantage of the Internet of Things. I want you to hire really good people, bright people, and empower them to try things. Give them the freedom to succeed, the freedom to fail. Ask basic questions. What if the opposite were true? What if there's a better way to do this? I want you to think differently. Instead of looking for the richest, look for the wettest. Try a different approach. Don't think like a doctor, think like a car mechanic. And then you will truly be working in the creative sector. Thank you very much.